12. The Prince Regent's expression told Gryph that he was about to argue the steward's request, but then it eased, and he nodded. As you wish. The mood in the throne room relaxed, and the tension eased like the string of a drawn bow when a battle is avoided. Without another word, Mirthendir strode down the steps of the dais and passed by Gryph. Come with me, the tall elf said. The steward held out a hand, indicating Gryph and his friends should go first. One by one they followed, leaving Gryph standing next to Gartheniel. As Gryph went to follow, a firm hand held his left forearm. Gryph looked from the hand to the steward's face. The man's expression was firm, unyielding, and gave no trace of the emotions contained inside him. Once the others were out of earshot, the steward turned to Gryph. Be true to the vows you are about to make, man from another place. If you betray them and survive, you will face me. The steward looked up into Gryph's eyes, and he was no longer a simple administrator, but something much more fearsome and much deadlier. My word is my bond, Gryph said. After a few tense heartbeats, the steward nodded and held out his hand, indicating Gryph should follow the others. They walked through several passageways and down several stairs, arriving at a room that Gryph realized was an armory, both odd and wondrous. Gryph's gear lay on a nearby table, armor repaired and weapons tended to. A stocky elf was handing out equipment to the others. Ovrim only took a few bundles of arrows. Gryph knew the power of the Zidai's weapon and armor, so he was not surprised. Tifila graciously accepted a pair of curved daggers, after the smith revealed they channeled life magic. Wick stood in front of an older elf woman. She held his staff, and a glow of pure mana flowed from her hands into the length of gnarled black wood. I've made a few improvements, the elf woman said, and handed the staff back to Wick. She looked up at Mirthendir and Gryph and motioned them to come to her. Good morning, Yriel. This is the player I'm sure you've heard about. The elf woman held out her hand to Gryph, and, after a momentary confusion, Gryph took it, wondering for the briefest of moments if she expected him to kiss it. He felt a flush move through his face as the thought pulsed through his mind, and Yriel smiled a knowing smile. Well met, Gryph the player, Yriel said, and then turned to Mirthendir. I am so sorry for your loss, Mir. Your father was a great man. He and I knew each other well. Words cannot do your loss justice. Thank you, Yriel. He always spoke highly of you. Gryph wondered at both the elf woman's use of a familiar nickname for the Prince Regent and her comment about knowing Lassendir well. Perhaps these high elves aren't as stodgy as they appear. Yriel sent a sideways glance at Gryph, and he saw a small smirk turn the corner of her mouth. Once again, he felt a blush redden his cheeks. Then it faded, and she was all business. What have you brought me? Mirthendir nodded at Gryph, and he placed the war stave of the Eladrin king on the table in front of her. Is that what I think it is? She said, eyes widening as Gryph laid the spear on the workbench. By the ancients, she said, her hand hovering over the length of the shaft reverently.
How did you come by this?
The Barrow, Gryph said, an unexpected surge of pride bubbling up inside him.
The Barrow? Oh, you are a mighty warrior to have survived such a place.
Before Gryph could comment or flush any more, she turned to Mirthandir, as if seeking his permission. The Prince Regent nodded his head, and Yeriel smiled.
You cannot know how long I've dreamt of this day,
she said, looking down on the artifact that was the symbol of authority for her people.
May I?
She asked, seeking Gryph's permission. Panic surged through Gryph. He understood the argument that the spear belonged to the elves of Sylvan Anor and not some random newcomer to the realms, but Gryph had no desire to give up the amazing weapon. I wonder if this is how the curator of the British Museum felt when they returned the Rosetta Stone to Egypt. With a sense of dread, Gryph nodded to Yeriel. Yeriel traced a reverent finger along the surface of the weapon, unwilling to touch it, as if she were examining the Holy Grail or Excalibur. After a moment, the elf exhaled, and Gryph realized the woman had been holding her breath. At their side, Mirthandir watched, an inscrutable look on his face.
An impressive weapon,
Yeriel said, not taking her eyes from it.
Crafted by 3 grand masters out of materials so rare and precious they were worth more than most kingdoms.
She moved her hand down the shaft of the spear. Whorls of color seemed to flow along the silver-colored shaft of the weapon like oil on water.
I never thought I'd see prismatic elementum in my lifetime. Thank you for letting me see it.
You're welcome, Gryph said, and she grinned at him, then turned her attention back to the weapon with all the joy of a child on Christmas morning.
This one was one of 4 items made to seal the alliance against the Dark Ascendancy. The High King of Sylvan Anor was given the spear. The warlord of the High Orcs received a belt of power, the king of the Nemerian High Men a potent ring, and the Stone King, the dwarf lord of Dar Thorim, bore an amulet said to strengthen the powers of the mind. Each was powerful alone, but together their capabilities were vast beyond comprehension. If one leader of the alliance died in battle, the others would take command of their forces and possession of the artifact they bore. Thus, it was believed the surviving leaders of the alliance would be powerful enough to absorb the loss. During the Exodus, the artifacts were lost. I cannot help but think the discovery of this weapon is an omen of things to come.
Gryph didn't want to interrupt the moment and gave Yeriel the time she needed. Eventually, the elf looked up at him, smiling the abashed grin of a kid with a new toy. She handed the spear to Gryph, the feeling of utter relief that passed through him as his fingers gripped the shaft of the weapon surprised and concerned him. Then a quest prompt filled his mind. You have been offered the quest, Weapons of the Alliance. Long ago, 4 wondrous artifacts were created to seal an alliance of ancient enemies. These items were of vast power, but if combined, they would make the bearer akin to a god. You have found one item, Find the other 3 and bring hope back to the realms. Difficulty: unearthly. Rewards: unknown. This is a multi-part quest. Each part has its own currently unknown rewards. Price of failure: none. XP: unknown. This quest cannot be refused. Holy crap, Gryph thought. The level of difficulty of this quest was unlike any he'd yet seen, but the rewards were commensurate to the difficulty. He had no idea when or if he'd be able to start, much less complete this quest, but he sure as hell wanted to try.
I have something for you,
Yiriel said, and motioned for Gryph to approach. She turned and placed her hand atop what looked to be a solid block of metal. She closed her eyes, and the metal flowed aside like mercury under her hand. A small part of Gryph panicked as he recognized the same technology that he'd seen in his soul reverie. But there was no buzzing, no malevolence, and Gryph pushed his panic down. Inside lay a variety of items, but a row of rectangular gemstones engraved with intricate runes and symbols drew Gryph's gaze. He wasn't much of a bling guy, and Finn had never worn so much as a watch, but his eyes widened.
I see you are a man of taste,
the elf woman said. She smiled, and then lifted an inch-long sapphire from the shelf. Delicate runes scrawled across its surface. Gryph pouted when his gift of tongues ability failed to provide him with a translation. Perhaps it does not work on a written script? She handed the gemstone to Gryph, and he felt a small shock as a low buzz filled his ears. Flashes of blue and white energy pulsed inside the sapphire depths. His identify ability flared, and Gryph knew it was an icon.
Do you know what that is?
Yiriel asked, nodding at the icon. An icon? Some kind of magical item, Gryph said in amazement, remembering that the stave had slots for icons. Yiriel grinned at Gryph like he was a child who thought a fusion reactor was just a battery.
Yes, a very potent magical item.
She took the icon from his palm and looked down at the spear.
May I?
Gryph nodded. She mumbled under her breath, and the icon floated off her hand. It spun in the air, and small sparks flowed across its surface. The flashes of blue mini-lightning illuminated the woman's eyes, and he realized that they were a deep storm-colored gray.
Magic is an entropic force. It matters not whether it is life or death magic, or of the order, or the chaos sphere.
This last bit she said with a thinning of her lips and a slight look at Mirthandir. Apparently rumors of the chaos infection had spread.
Magic is virulent and unrelenting. It wears down anything that tries to constrain it. We use items to store this power. The stronger the item, the more resistant it is to the deprivations of magic. Icons are the pinnacle of this concept. They are rare and valuable gemstones infused with potent magics.
Her hand caressed the tip of the spear, and as her hands moved down the shaft, the adamantine tip sprang from its housing.
Do you see these slots carved right below the spearhead?
Gryph nodded.
They are icon slots, meant to hold icons.
This last bit she said in a tone that made Gryph think of the ancient earth saying, "Wait for it." She lowered her hand, and the icon spun and sparked above it. A faint blue glow rose behind her pupils, mirroring the discharges inside the sapphire. She grunted in concentration and effort, and Gryph watched as the effort brought a sheen of sweat to her brow. She turned her hand upside down and gripped the spear tightly with her other hand, holding it down as if she expected it to lash out at her. The icon hovered below her hand as she moved her palm closer to the slot on the spear. Her hand shook as if the spear and the icon were two magnets of the same polarity. Neither wanted to be mated to the other, and Gryph could feel the power raging to prevent this union. Yriel grunted, forcing more mana and more willpower into the icon. It was spinning so fast it was a blur. Small bolts of lightning flashed from the surface, punching into the spear, the table, and even into Yriel herself. Each discharge caused her to grunt in pain, but her focus never wavered. Gryph's heart thundered as he watched. Then the light grew too bright to focus upon. A wind whipped through the room, and the glow globes grew brighter and flickered. Then, with a sudden clap of thunder and explosion of chill air, the icon snapped into the slot on the spear. All eyes in the room were on the spear as the icon flashed once, twice, 3 times, each flash surging tendrils of electricity up and down the weapon. A few moments passed, and the distant rumble of thunder stopped, and the flashes of blue eased as the blue gemstone drew them back into itself. With a satisfied grin, Yriel picked the spear up and handed it to Gryph.
"What do you think?"
Gryph took the spear in his hands, and his mouth hung open as a prompt filled his vision. Warstave of the Elven King, El-Adrene Warstave. Item class, Artifact. Item category, Passive, Active. Base damage, 18, plus 8 artifact bonus. Passive powers. Power 1, plus 20% total mana. Power 2, store 200 points of mana. Power 3, plus 3 to all attributes. Power 4, plus 20% immunity to all spheres of magic. Active powers. Power 1, penetrating strike, damage added to strike. Mana limit, 10%, plus option for 20% of stored mana. Cooldown, 10 minutes. Icons slotted, 1 of 6. Icon 1, Maelstrom of Yriel. This is an icon of air magic. Icon category, Passive, Active. Charges, 125, 100 base plus 25 item power perk. Passive icon powers. Power, 1, 25%, 20% plus 5% item power perk, reduction to the mana requirements for air magic spells. Active icon powers. Power, 1, Yriel's Bite, plus 5 electrical damage added to strike, plus 1 per level of air magic mastery, times 1.25 item power perk. Cost, 1 charge. Cooldown, 10 seconds. Power, 2, Yriel's Maelstrom. Creates an explosion of electrical power reminiscent of a lightning strike that causes 12.5, 10 points times 1.25 item power perk. Points of damage per level of air magic mastery to everything in a 20-foot radius. The bolts will avoid hitting the user as well as any members of the adventure party, making them effectively immune. Cost 25 charges. Cooldown 1 hour. Icon regeneration 1.25 charges per hour. This magnificent weapon was constructed by 3 Grand Masters, an Eladrin Smith, a Nimmerian Imbue Master, and a Thalmir Artificer, with a gift of ultra-rare prismatic elementum from the Ral Zanag, Orcs, to commemorate the alliance against the Dark Ascendancy. To create the war stave of the Elven King, 4 ingots of white mithril to construct the stave itself, 1 ingot of prismatic elementum, a mix of black, blue, and white elementum, entwined throughout, 6 draughts of ether worm blood to etch the slots for 6 icons, an ingot of adamant to make the adamantine spear tip, and 4 blood diamonds, diamonds infused with the blood of powerful beings, in this case a willing offering from the 4 racial leaders of the Alliance. 1 icon has been added to the artifact. Holy shit, Gryph said, unable to keep his amazement in check.
I thought you'd like it,
Yeriel said with a sly smile. You made this?
It bears my name, does it not?
She said with a wry note. Can you teach me? Mirthandir snorted. Do you have decades to devote to the study of imbuing? He exchanged a grin with Yeriel. If you even have the affinity for the skill? Imbuing. What is that? Gryph asked, feeling relief wash over him. They have no idea I have 100% affinity in everything, thanks to the Godhead.
It is one of the rarer crafting skills. Essentially, it allows me to force my personal mana into an object, saving it until needed. Like I said before, magic can be corrosive to flesh and blood beings, so the gemstone takes the burden instead.
Gryph ran his hand along the icon, stunned to discover that it had set perfectly inside the slot. The barely noticeable seam would not hinder his use of the weapon. Can it be removed? Gryph asked.
Are you expecting to find a treasure trove of icons?
Yeriel asked, her hand on her hip, and her smile giving Gryph the "you're an idiot" look that was the same for all women across all universes and all cultures. Maybe, Gryph said with a grin, trying to regain some high ground in the relationship.
It is as difficult to remove as it is to slot, especially if you don't know what you're doing.
So I shouldn't just pry it out with the dagger?
Oh, not unless you want all the stored mana to explode in your face.
Gryph was properly chastised. What happens if I run out of charges?
You wait for it to recharge. Or you come back to me, or someone like me, and I place more mana into it.
That doesn't sound so bad. The older elf woman laughed at him.
Oh, youngling, you have so much to learn. Survive the Thalmir city, and I'll teach you, if you are pliable enough.
Yeriel said with a smile. Is it just me, or are the women of the realms a little more flirty and aggressive? I'll hold you to that, Gryph said, trying to force snark into his tone. Yeriel tossed a quick glance at the loop of spider silk rope at his waist, and another flush of red flashed across his cheeks.
Good, she said. Now, Shu, the steward has one last thing for you.
Gryph turned to see his companions standing in a semicircle as Gartheniel walked up with a velvet-padded box containing 5 ruby-laden platinum bands. Gryph's mood soured at the sight of the rings. He wasn't sure what rings of binding fellowship were, but he suspected his life was about to get even more complicated.